Welcome back to another episode of John, your daily sports sum, where we plunge into the sports world. We are a sports pipeline for breaking news, game recaps, and the hottest takes in the sports industry. So by taking care of business, let us flush out the details and fill you in on what's happening. Take a seat, get comfortable, and make sure you have plenty of TP. It's time to explode the commode. I'm your host, John, and today we're joined by the founder of BSF Pitching Performance, Ryan McWilliams. We're talking pitching development, velocity jumps, and what it takes to build and become a really elite pitcher, especially now with all the technology around. Ryan, at first I want to say thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to make time for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, man.
Totally. So, for people who don't know who you are and what BSF pitching is, tell everybody what that is and what you
Yeah,
kind of do.
yeah. So my name is Ryan McWilliams. Founded BSF Pitching Performance 4 years ago. We're in all three Bo Jackson's Elite Sports Domes. Started. I partnered here with the Bo Jackson Dome. 2022. My last year in my college, I was at Charleston.
Mhm.
I was building a remote training business. I had past injury history with thoracic outlet, traveling to multiple different places and, had a whole career journey path change with going through a vascular and a neurogenic
Yeah.
thoracic outlet surgery, which I was at a current school that I had to get surgery during that time. They had to drop my scholarship and cut me. Then COVID hit, and then I had a year to really just kind of learn and figure out what I needed to do to get back to that next level. And went to Charleston as a two-way. So I two-wayed, all through college too. But then my last year at Charleston, I did decide to PO just because of the thoracic outlet and just the swinging, which was how I got the TOS, was actually breaking my first rib from swinging. So I had to put the bat down and just, up and down at Charleston with my career and the health, specifically after surgery. And, my last year in my college dorm room, I decided to build a remote training business and then was able to partner with the Bo Jackson Dome and then start to develop that in-house culture. Then was able to build it out into the other two domes. And then now we're actually, developing our remote training business. So we brought on, multiple guys to do that. First guy that comes to my mind, director of remote performance, Colin Sharman. He's done a great job with our remote athletes. So we do a lot of remote as well. And so, yeah, man, we're helping athletes. I would say our biggest asset as coaches too is, you know, be in that willingness to learn. And so that's exactly kind of what I did in my career, my path, right when I was doing the remote training business, I was doing exercise science and, things like that and just learning, grasping that. And then, right now I became a biomechanics specialist, pursuing as a muscle system specialist practitioner. So kind of bridging that gap with, the sports performance, the medical practitioner world and just really, surrounding myself with guys at those levels.
Totally. What made you kind of want to do something like this, right? It's one thing to be a coach, but you're kind of going at it in a whole different aspect involving really feel like you're doing a great job involving the modern technology that we use in baseball in your coaching. So what made you kind of be like, I want to be a coach and help these guys, right? Most people when they think of BSF, they think of guys like who are in the MLB, Ryan Sloan, right? Jack Bauer, Connor Essenberg, guys like that from the also Illinois area. So what made you kind of want to do this specific sort of thing where it's not just, right, I'm just a pitching coach. I'm a pitching coach, but I also know my stuff on the physical side of the sport and what made you kind of go down this path?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Going against the norm, you know, if you want to play at a high level, and obviously one, you got to build that physicality, but two, it's also understanding that you just showing up for a one-on-one lesson for 30 minutes once a week is not going to cut it. And especially like understanding like the demand that the next level is going to be placing on you and what expectations are and ultimately just being an impact player. If you want to be an impact player, like the question becomes, how are you going to separate yourself, right? And so yeah, like we have a lot of technology, and we utilize it to the best of our ability and we use it for practical application usage, right? We just purchased the Edgertronics, and so now building that into the Trackman and the pitch design sessions and little things like that, and utilizing the Vault technology to make good decisions on training programs. I think, that's getting guys, at least in high school, prepared for college, or
Mhm.
at least now they could be mature freshmen walking in, or even if you go JUCO for those 2 years, right, you got a better grasp on everything. And, now you can put yourself back out on the market, after your 2 years at JUCO going into a 4 year, being already a guy that's been exposed to this technology where, you know, a lot of it just depends on, some college programs, like are they more focused on player development or are they more focused on, getting guys ready to just go out and compete and win? I mean, that's the job of a college coach, just to go out and win. They're going to put the best guys out there to do that.
Hmm.
And so there are some times where the player development isn't as focused, but at the end of the day, the individual, he's responsible for his development, even outside of what goes in within the team. And so we provide those resources. We provide that. Even on the remote side, if, we have remote athletes that will fly, in-house, to our HQ here in Lockport to do all of our testing. So tomorrow I have a left-handed pitcher, Colin Duraco. He's a South Carolina commit. One sec. He's a South Carolina commit, and he's flying out for his reassessment on his metrics. And so we even have remote training, like or the remote assessment stuff too, in case people can't. It's not feasible for them to make it in house. And so, just getting them exposed to that, and really, it's about educating. So, for us, like that's a huge thing that we stay on top of. And all of our guys here at BSF, like we challenge each other. We're always pushing the needle forward and as to how we can keep building that knowledge and have a thirst for that. I think that's very important to keep progressing what you're doing from a practical application world. But that's how I personally, wanted to go into that route in that private sector. And yeah, I mean, obviously there is one-on-one time with bullpens and pitch design stuff, but it's providing kids with structure and routines. Even we train youth guys, so I would say on the youth side of things, like these kids get pulled in many different directions. They have a hard time grasping what they should be prioritizing or what they should be doing. But that's where we come into play to help guide them, build them structure, build them routines, teach them the importance of not only off-season, but in-season training. And that's why we have our own BSF app. And, we do a great job with staying organized with our athletes. Even when guys are throwing bullpens or live, we have a plus and minus system where they can move it on their app, where it's teaching them what to do the days before and the day after they throw live or a bullpen. So each day with the minus or the plus is going to have a different objective: intensity, volume, distance, what they're doing in the weight room 2 days versus 5 days before or the day after. So, that is an educational side of things that we like to hit upon with guys. And the earlier you get exposed to that, I think the better you start to build awareness. And that's the goal. And that was always my goal, even when I started my remote training business in my college dorm room. So that was very important, was to get guys to understand what it takes to get to the next level.
Hmm. Totally, totally. And you talked a little bit about it there, but how important do you think something like a Trackman, or all those, there's so many of systems now with track and baseball and stuff like that, but Trackman's obviously one of the ones that comes to mind. With all those sort of stuff, that how important do you think that stuff is for you, and especially in today's game?
Well, in today's game, you can't guess. So you got to know who you are as a pitcher. Whether you're a north to south guy, east to west, it's just obviously important to build awareness. So we utilize the TrackMan to not only track like how their pitchers are moving, but also to track that data over time. Data tells you a story, so it allows us, to help better their arsenals. And again, I mean, I could dive into the nitty gritty pieces of stress adaptations and neurological adaptations from one off season to the next off season, when mechanics start to alter and change, which will then dictate the byproduct of metrics. Because again, release, the timing of wrist
Yeah.
pronation is going to dictate whether you're a supinator or heavy pronator guy. But that all comes down to how the rest of the body is moving and adapting towards stress. So, your brain's always trying to find the path of least resistance. So, sometimes metrics can alter from one off season to the next. And so now it's just kind of understanding, okay, well, how's the system moving as a whole, or if we're liking those new shapes and stuff like that, is the body durable to handle those new stress adaptations? And now we're going to start to work with what we got and, mess around with some things. And then that's why we purchased the Edgertronics, to dive a lot deeper into, okay, how is the ball coming off the fingertips? Do we need a seam shift? Do we need to change this a little bit? So it helps the pitcher develop a better identity of who they are. So when they're confident knowing, okay, I understand that my fastball plays here versus here, it helps them understand like how to execute pitches in game, which is the goal, right? Throwing strikes, getting outs, little things like that. Obviously, the training, the byproduct is velocity. Everyone wants it, but it's how you use it.
Mhm.
Um, little things like that. And even with the TrackMan. So, I would say something that's really cool. that we're doing now, we brought on a guy by the name of Luke Wolf. He's one of our R&D guys, and he's been developing, a bunch of new software for us. So we're going to be in the works of developing a Stuff Plus model, heat map zone, and then even like a dashboard for all the Vault technology stuff. But like when we're pulling Trackman data, starting to develop, a full comprehensive, software system. And so guys can start understanding where their stuff plays and little things like that. And then ultimately that's awesome for us, with college coaches or high school coaches to have those communications and, conversations with of like, hey man, we've tracked this amount of pens and here's the Stuff Plus model. Here's the heat map zone. Here's how his stuff plays. This is where he's going to live best and ultimately be successful for you, as a coach and be an impact player for you. And that's really, and also too, the technology developing player profiles is going to be huge to help kids with recruiting.
Yeah.
The recruiting world's a very stressful world. I mean, 2 weeks ago, I just did a master class with Sports Force. So we went into the whole player development side of things. We went into the whole recruiting side of things, how to separate yourself. And so if there's a high school, guy listening to this, it's like, okay, like, how are you going to separate yourself amongst, just videos, put it up on Twitter? Like, are you exposed to the data? Do you have a better idea of who you are from an identity perspective as a pitcher? And, are you exposed to this? Because if you are going to a good school that has that technology, now when those colleges are recruiting a kid that's been exposed to this type of private sector development, they're going to look at him as a mature kid walking into those doors where he already has that identity, where those coaches aren't taking the time on the front end to like revamp him or educate him, because sometimes they just don't have the time to do that because they're focused on, here's my guys, here's the season. I'm obligated as a coach to win. And so, that's where it's also going towards now. And so, and I have great relationships with MLB agents. And so they come in house and, they're watching it and getting the data from us, and we're sending it to them and they send it to their other guys and other scouts. So again, man, it's just a comprehensive approach. But that's just the awareness that we want athletes, not only in the Chicagoland area, and we have another dome in Columbus, in the Columbus area, but even for our remote guys to have the opportunity, when they train remote with us, to be able to come in-house and start getting some of that data too for them.
Totally. I think you hit it right on the dot. With all the heat maps, all this stuff. If you're trying to play at college, even a smaller school like a Bradley, all of them are starting to get all of these sort of stats and Trackman, all of these little like things that you brought up for pitching. I mean, it's something that like every program has, which is crazy to say because of how 2 years, 4 years ago, you would have thought there's no way almost every program is, but now everyone is like, we need to, because pitching is so, I mean, Bradley, we have a good offense. Our pitching isn't the best this year. Like pitching is, I think, the most important side of the game, right? Because I mean, hitting is, I think, the easy part of the game. I mean, compared to pitching, because you got to locate, if you miss, more than likely you're going to get penalized. And I think because of all of the like machines and stuff that all these colleges have now, I think you made a very valid point in saying you need to sort of separate yourself, especially in the recruiting now where everything's like everyone posts videos on Twitter, on Instagram, on like all that stuff. So I think that's a great point that you make. My next question, what's something most young pitchers are doing wrong right now? Like something that you see is a very common issue, or like a guy meets you for the first time and it's something that you've seen a lot with newer guys.
It's a pretty loaded question. I wouldn't say they're doing anything wrong intentionally. I would just say they just don't have the education and the awareness.
Mhm.
I mean, I guess the first thing that kind of comes into my mind would be, during our first day assessment, for our metric testing, we take guys through a very comprehensive, assessment approach with things. And so when we're done with our table assessment, so we do a very, very, very in-depth assessment looking at motor output and stability, looking at range of motion and going back to motor output testing and seeing can they hold, those positions well from a neurological and physiological perspective. But then when we're done with the whole table work and educating them on the importance of all that, when they go off into their pre-throw, I kind of like to sit back and evaluate like, okay, what does this kid know what he needs to do before the throwing. So I kind of evaluate from an educational perspective. And so just the way that if they approach that, I think, again, it's not something that they're doing intentionally. They just don't know. Probably a big reason why they're joining us, to develop that structure, develop that routine, and ultimately just learn. So I would just say something like along those lines, with that, it's like it's developing that awareness of like, what should I be doing pre-throw? How should I be managing my throwing during the week with my workload? And what should I be doing, after? I
Totally.
mean,
So my next question, obviously, you've been able to see elite high school pitchers, right? What separates a good high school pitcher from someone who can really play and compete at the next level?
yep, that's another great question. Well, I think it just really comes down to your preparation. So Bob Knight has a really good quote. Anyone can have the willingness to win, but few are willing to prepare to win, right? Along those lines. And so that to me is huge, right? The preparedness, right? What's your structure like? What's your routines like? And then kind of like going what I was talking a little bit about with the Trackman and the data is understanding who you are as a pitcher, learning how to attack the zone with what you have, and being just very aware on understanding how to use your misses wisely, then how to execute the off speed, and just learning that type of style of pitching, right? Because I think just so many kids when they feel like they are behind the eight ball, they feel like they got to rush and rush and rush for the velocity, and then sometimes their body, from a physicality perspective, just cannot sustain that. They're not durable enough. And that's why, one of my favorite lines that I talk about is all physical potential is genetic, but not all genetic potential is physical. And so, sometimes kids are born with a great neurological skill set where they could throw really hard, but again, and with really good movement, but again, their body isn't durable enough to sustain that. So, from that perspective, the physicality and the preparedness for the physicality to handle the demand that the next level is going to be placing on you is also a big part. And then there's going to be some kids that are physically, really strong in the weight room. They have great metrics, but from a neurological skill set perspective, we got to enhance the skill. And that's just kind of like the awareness that we dive deep into in our assessment. Okay, what does this kid need more of? What doesn't he need more of? Like, what is he really good at? But what is he, really weak in? Or what's his deficiencies? And then just how to develop a comprehensive plan and go out and attack that.
Totally, totally. And you talked a little bit about it just in that question. How important is the weight room for pitchers, would you say?
It plays a role, right? But again, at the same time, you don't see some of these guys at MLB, right, that are throwing 98 to 100. They're not getting underneath the barbell, benching 315 and squatting four. So there is a strength cap for where sometimes strength isn't always going to be the answer. And so that is understanding how to learn what they need to do more of in the weight room. And like I would say, like a great piece of that is utilizing the vault force plates
Okay.
and testing. But also just, again, like I would even go back to that plus and minus approach, like what to do the days before you throw live, what to do the day after to get the central nervous system ready and prepared. But obviously, yeah, like your youth and your high school, like, yes, they still need to develop the strength. And strength is an arbitrary term that we have sort of developed and made up in this industry over the years, because the question becomes, well, define strength. Like, what is strength? Like, a lot of people have a hard time defining what strength is. So my thing is, well, what positions are you strong in, and where do you need to be strong in, and what positions, right? So that kind of dives very deep back into like my studies as a practitioner of understanding motor output. It's also known as biomotor unit configuration, understanding like shoulder stability could be really strong here with the head in a neutral position, but then shoulder stability depletes with the cervical influence position because now you're incorporating the neck, and you're also changing the length tension relationship and the distance from
Okay.
proximal to more distal seg. You know what I'm saying? So it's just
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it's just understanding that. It's just like, developing that awareness of like, okay, like what am I really good at already that I don't need to just keep hammering that, or what do I need to get better at? More speed and power work, plyometric work, sprint work, like all that. So it obviously plays a role. It plays a role in developing the durability, but it also plays a role in sustaining that durability. But I would also say the importance of the weight room is also being aware of like the difference between off-season and in-season training, right? And understanding that your in-season weight room training shouldn't be, you know, an off-season approach.
Yeah.
So the throwing in itself in season or a high intent bullpen or a live outing is a high CNS day
Mhm.
where we don't need to go hit another high CNS lift that's going to completely destroy your body. So it's just understanding that as a whole.
Totally, totally. And right, obviously most people when they hear BSF, I talked about him earlier, they think of Jack Bauer, right? Throwing 103 miles an hour in high school. What's one thing that you live by, right? And you BSF has started to get a really good reputation of helping people gain a lot of velocity. What's something that like of a lot something that you live by in order to help people like grow in their velocity, like something that is a pillar for you?
Well, I mean, I guess if you want to talk on the velocity side of things, it's one, the velocity is the byproduct of what you're doing from a training perspective, from an individualized perspective, how we help with that, but providing structure, not just for a couple months or 3 months, but the whole year, right? This is a journey. Guys can gain, but can you sustain the velocity? Can you
Yeah.
have a good sit range? And so that's kind of like the conversation that we have with our athletes of thinking long term with that development and how you do one thing's how you do everything. So it's not just what you do in the training facilities, how you take care of yourself outside of it as well, what you from an athlete perspective. And so that all just kind of ties into the velocity development. But it's also getting athletes to understand the maturity behind growing and developing in the training to then pursue a certain velocity number or to hold and sustain a velocity number because again the game and the sport itself is placing a demand on that for the entry level, right? For what these kids' goals are and what they're wanting to do. So it's again, man, it all comes down to educating. And so that I think that's what we do a great job at is separating ourselves even through our social media. Like we do a great job at educating our guys. And ultimately, the other part is just being a mentor to them as well,
Yeah.
So I think that's a huge part with these kids.
Totally. And right, you talked a little bit about it earlier, but in how you guys like mentor and stuff like that. How do you I feel like now more than ever, and it stinks because I feel like the pitching now is better than ever, but it's so common now to see so many young people or pitchers in the MLB, Tommy John, right? All of these arm injuries. So how do you kind of prevent your guys from getting it and also kind of if they're starting to feel a little something, kind of taking it easy on them rather than right? I feel like sometimes kids if they're I mean high school if your arm is sore, you take Advil, arm candy, and you just throw. So how do you kind of advise your guys to not do that if they're feeling a little bit of pain? And how do you kind of also with like I talked about all the injuries going on?
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about that for hours, but I would definitely say, you can never prevent, you can minimize.
Okay.
And so, again, like I think when it comes to the injury side of things, it's you can never pinpoint one thing or one measurement or one, inning or one outcome that, oh, that's the reason why he tore it or that's the reason why he got hurt. It's an accumulation of over time, which is why, like, from I guess you could talk about a mechanical perspective is like the way I personally define pitching mechanics is that it's an expression based on how much stress that you've adapted over the years of throwing. And so with youth baseball now, it's the youth is placing such a bigger demand on these kids' arms than it ever has before. And so the way that their bodies are adapting to that stress and how much chronic workload that they're experiencing, and then the ways their bodies adapts to that stress, and then the way that they start to move in their high school, and then they start pushing that limit of that physicality and skill at some point, it's just some kids from a subjective perspective just cannot handle it. I mean, you could dive so deep into like how they're genetically made up, what their tissue quality is like,
Yeah.
anatomically perspective with lever length and bones and how dense it is versus all that, dude. There's so much that goes into that with an injury. But if people that want to pinpoint one little thing, it's like they don't really have a full grasp on just those variables. And there are a lot of variables. But at the same time, it's the preparedness. It's preparing, and so workload managing, understanding how to gauge that properly. I've been doing, a lot of fair share with like we have doctors that are referring, athletes to us when they get cleared is to start getting them ramp up and like I want to use the word rehab pretty loosely because that's what I'm trying to pursue as a full licensed practitioner to really dive deep into that. But we've helped guys with that return to throw and progression. And I've collaborated with a lot of physical therapists, and I've actually had a few physical therapists that actually came out to learn more off of me of what we're doing to help with that. And, so again, but like, that's kind of like what I talk about, like as us coaches, not only as mentors and being a support system is so like, yeah, like the day after they're outing, they're a lot more sore, which is obviously going to be pretty normal, but that's when they can come schedule table work and stuff with us and allow us to help them with that. Or, have constant communication with athletes of how am I going to prepare my next week?
Totally.
But like how we're going to help them structure like what that next week of throwing looks like based on when they know when they're going to be throwing next.
Hmm.
But that gets tricky because even if you're a bullpen guy, you might be going back to back days or back to back to back. I've seen that happen. So, but that's the demand that the sport is placing. But it also comes down to the subjectivityness of, you know, who your coach is and what's their communication like and how do they utilize pitchers. Like there's some coaches here in high school that do a really good job with, hey, it's March, I know my starters, I know my bullpen guys, we're going to get our starters 2 to 3 innings and build up their pitch count and then start to go 1 or 2 innings for the bullpen guys. So as a coach, I know who I need to start to rely on more, when crunch time starts happening with closer to playoffs. So I know who my long reliever or my short reliever or my closer is, and then build that sustainability for his staff. And there are some coaches that are like, no, I want to win right now in March. I'm gonna make my starters go 6 innings and throw 90 pitches. And now, yes, that also falls on the athlete because obviously the coaches are going to ask like, how are you feeling? So again, that's the educational part
Yeah.
about the athletes of like, don't get so caught up in the moment if this is your first or second live outing of the spring and you went from 40 to 50 pitches or 30 to 40 pitches, with bullpens and stuff to 100 or 90. It's like you got to have that balance. So don't be in the fear of missing out.
Hmm.
So it's just understanding how to balance all that as well.
Totally. And this question, obviously it's about younger athletes, but just in general in professionals in college as well, what is one, like, would you say, common mistake that you see when people are trying to, or when pitchers are trying to throw harder than they normally would? Like, let's say I normally sit 76, but I'm just trying to chuck the ball and trying to sit 80 for the whole game. Like, what is something that you see that's a very common mistake?
Well, I mean, again, that's a loaded question because I mean, hmm. Well, all right, here's the thing. If you're going into the training side of things, like in order to throw harder, you gotta create an adaptation to throw hard. Okay. So you can't expect to just throw at 80% all the time and just expect velocity just to start to jump, right? But I guess when you come, like, I guess from an in-game perspective, I would say a great pitcher knows how to change speeds and they know when to ramp that fastball up with 2 strikes when they want to put a little bit more juice on it
Yeah.
if they can control it. If they start finding themselves throwing a fastball at 100% and first inning they're 78-80 or 90-92, and then second inning they're down 2 to 3 clicks, and the next inning they're down 3 to 5 clicks. It's like, okay, it looked like you just kind of push too hard with that. It's understanding how to change your speeds and obviously create fastball separation, use the off speed wisely. So I just think that's just a maturity thing in my eye. And I think that's just an awareness thing at the end of the
Totally.
day.
Totally. And then my next question, who's one athlete that you've worked with that made a huge jump and what changed in them?
I mean, obviously Bauer.
Yeah.
I mean, but here's the thing with Bauer. He's a freak. I mean, it's just, I mean, he came to me his junior or at the end of his sophomore year with a hurt shoulder.
Okay.
Uh, I wouldn't say hurt. He just was experiencing some shoulder, like just shoulder things, and it was limiting him a little bit. And ultimately, the kid just needed more structure, guidance, and routines. And so, that's what we helped him with. And obviously, he's now at the level that he's at. But by providing him with structure, providing him with routines, helping him develop that, it was able to help him express what he was potentially genetically capable of.
Hmm.
But if he didn't have that structure, didn't have that routine, didn't know what he should be doing in the offseason versus in season, and he was just being used and abused in the normal culture, I guess that you could say that we've developed here in America, I would say he probably wouldn't express that and he probably would have gone down this rabbit hole. But I mean, obviously very blessed to be able to work with him and have him be a part of, what our mission is at BSF and watching him have success at Mississippi State. And obviously couldn't be more proud of a guy. And, even in the senior year, like we were collaborating with Boris Agency and, helping him out with the communication with his agents and what they wanted to see and the pitch counts and the build up and, the weight room side of things. And we did a really good job at collaborating with that and helping that overall and having multiple people in his corner as a support system was obviously really huge. But he was another guy, like he came in, 88, 92, before he was dealing with some shoulder stuff. And then, yeah, about 3 months later, after doing tons of isometrics and just developing better pre-throw and workload management with him and stuff like that, he went out to a PBR or was a perfect game. It was some All-American thing he was on TV with, and he was up to 95 then, and then it just kept kind of progressing, which was awesome. I mean, it was really cool to see that he was able to, he was locked in more on his nutrition, put on, good amount of lean muscle mass and just things like that. And then just all, like I said, man, ultimately, like, he had an early release for his high school and stuff. So we had him come in a little bit earlier, like around 2 o'clock before, it started to get really slammed. So it gave him a little bit more autonomy to take the time that he needed to go through his work and obviously be able to utilize the full entire bow dome to his advantage and have that time. And so helping him with his schedule with school and, outside, activities, but then getting him in here early, opening those doors up, getting his work in. And then, in the off season, then obviously he'd go back home and focus on his sleep and nutrition. But he even did that in the in season, come in early after school, did his stuff. Then he went out to the field and took care of what he needed to do with practice. And it's just like, from a support system, mentorship, role wise, that definitely played a big role. And ultimately his mentality, he was a guy that wanted to take it in, hey, I want to make the adjustments on my own with my command and find those mental cues. And obviously we helped guide him towards that. But, he took a lot of initiative on his own. And so it was awesome to see that, for those couple year or 3 years, he was able to call this place home, and he still comes back, during the off season here and there with us. And, obviously he's going to be, doing a good amount with Mississippi State, but, yeah, he's definitely a guy. So it's been really cool to see.
Totally. And this one's kind of about, pitch design. How much has pitching changed in the last 5 to 10 years with pitch design?
Yeah, I mean, I think just because of the advancement of technology, again, it's just developed better awareness for coaches to understand, but it's also a learning curve. I'm not going to say that I know every little inside detail because I myself am still learning. I'm trying to push the needle forward for my personal development on learning more and more and more. And that's what it takes. And that's what you should be doing. So it's definitely a learning curve, but it definitely has changed, at least understanding more about what the data is telling us and how this pitcher is moving. But again, those are also just the numbers that it's just displaying on the screen. Again, with what I'm trying to understand from my studies and stuff is how he got there,
Okay.
right? How the body got there, what the body is doing to produce those results and those metrics, or why did those metrics change? Is it for the worse or is it for the better? So it definitely has progressed.
Totally. And this is kind of, I feel like the mental side for hitting is always talked about for pitching. I feel like not many people talk about the mental side of pitching. So how do you build confidence in a pitcher who, right, let's say has had 3 rough outings in a row? Like, how do you build confidence in a pitcher that's maybe having a rough start to the season or a rough couple of outings?
Well, if you're going to let your results dictate what your process is like, then you've fallen short. So, whether you had a great outing or a bad outing, everyone can fall back on their routines and how they prepare. So
Okay.
again, anyone could have the willingness to win, but few have the willingness to prepare.
Yeah.
So if you're not preparing, it's like, and that's where confidence is built.
Mhm.
Confidence is built what you're doing to prepare, because when you step in between those white lines and you're on the mound, you got a mentor behind you as a coach, like with us. You've done everything in your power from one outing to the next, the days in between, to be fully ready to go for that next outing. And then at the end of the day, you're on an island. So what are you talking like to yourself like is it self-positive, or are you in a fearful mindset where I hope I throw a strike, I hope I don't hit this guy, I hope I don't walk this guy, versus no, I'm gonna go attack this guy, this guy's taking away my opportunity. It's like those are just like the little things from a mentality, perspective that we harp on our guys is about. It's your willingness to prepare, not just about the willingness to win or have a great outing. Because if you're not focused on your preparedness, and you're not preparing, and all week long you're just worried about what I'm going to be doing for that next outing or what my outing will look like, you've really fallen short already. And now you've just let the game get to you. And it's just like, you got to understand how to prepare and fall back on your routines.
Totally. What would you say separates I know we talked a little bit about it. What separates a mentally tough pitcher from just another pitcher, right? Someone who's kind of not as strong mentally, lets everything get to them. What would you say kind of separates those two?
Well, I mean, self-confidence obviously is the first thing that comes to my mind. And it just goes back to like what I just said about it's the it just goes back to the preparedness to win. It's just your preparedness. It's like guys that are the most confident are the most confident on the mound. Why? Because they're disciplined with their routines. They're consistent. They have great structure. But they also have a mentor or a staff in their corner that's going to help guide them towards how to either make slight adjustments mentally or physically, but also know that when to shut that off from a mechanical and physical perspective of, now this is more of my mental battle with myself. And, what's my attack plan, or am I studying the game? Am I preparing to know who I'm facing? Obviously with the next level, like with, MLB or even college, like you start to already understand, like, are you watching film? Like, are you watching, the hitters that you might be, facing, when they were playing another team, and understanding, those hitters' tendencies and stuff like that. So at the end of the day, dude, I think it just really goes back to like the athlete's structure, their routines, being consistent and taking care of their bodies outside of the training. And yeah, ultimately just preparing. That's what's developing confidence.
Totally, totally. So I got three more like kind of not as serious questions, then I got a closing question for you. What would you say is the hardest pitch to teach?
Hardest pitch to teach. I mean, I think it's case by case with an athlete.
Okay.
Um, I mean, yeah, I don't really have an objective answer behind that, because
Okay.
I think it just comes down to the type of pitcher that you are,
Yeah.
because depending on your arm angle, and just the way that your body is kinematically working and sequencing, there's just going to be some pitches that they just cannot throw, that they
Yeah.
have a hard time throwing. And there's going to be some pitches when you're understanding metrics that this is your best usage for your arsenal. So it is, that's again, that's another reason why the data is very important, to understand what pitch to throw and to not throw. Because if we're not going to throw this pitch, like, why we're going to try and like mentally exhaust this guy by trying to force it upon him?
Totally.
It's like, no, let's reroute. So yeah,
Totally.
that's kind of my answer to that.
Totally. What would you say is the most overrated stat in baseball?
Hmm. I would I'll give credit to Sharman over there. He said wins, and I would say wins too. Just because you could have a great outing, you could shove for 5 or 6 innings, but if your offense isn't producing, it's kind of a tough thing to overcome. But yeah, I would say probably wins. But
Totally.
ultimately, are you as a pitcher, are you at least out there being competitive and giving your team a chance to win? So
Exactly. Yeah, I think talking about win, I think was it Rick Porcello? I think he had like 20 wins when he won the Cy Young. Like years, like 10 years ago, even wins were such an important stat when they were looking at Cy Young winners, and now they're like not as important, which I think is a good thing because I don't think you should value how good that person's team is compared to how good that person actually is. Like Paul Skeens, the Pirates, even though their offense actually looked a little normal yesterday, even though they ended up actually losing. But like Paul Skeens, the Pirates are terrible. But Paul Skeens, they're starting to recognize Paul Skeens is elite. Like that's the switch that I liked that has happened over the years in baseball. Whereas years prior, who knows if Paul Skeens is getting as much attention as he is now because he's not on a good team, so his record is going to be a little twisted.
it's a good point.
What would you say is an underrated trait in a pitcher that you really like that you don't think most coaches or people around the pitching side of the game that don't talk much about it?
Hmm. It's a great question. Um, Hmm. The first thing that pops into my head is like that the the grittiness behind a pitcher of like kind of, you get a strikeout, you kind of just stare a guy down, or you just do little things like that to kind of get in their head. Like some coaches encourage it, some are like, no, you can't do that.
Hmm.
And I feel like sometimes like if you force that upon a guy of like if that's how he is from a mentality perspective, he's that gritty guy, like he just he wants to mentally dome up those hitters, staring them down, just doing funky things like that, or and coaches bash that. I think it kind of coaches the athlete out of him, or kind of like coaches the mentality out of the athlete. So kind of staying even keel with that to me is pretty important. But yeah, it's like kind of just having that just that raw dog type of self-confidence,
Totally.
on the mound, just being gritty with it. So that's kind of like what my answer would be on that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, when you talk about the staring down at batters, the first athlete I think of is Trevor Bauer. Like, I think
Yeah.
he's the first dude that is and he's right doing it now with YouTube. I think he's the first dude, like, pitcher that really did it and then kept on doing it. Like, he wasn't just doing it one, like, he would talk his trash, stare him down, sword sell, like all that stuff. So I think Trevor Bauer is like a perfect definition of that. He talks all this smack, but he can back it up as well. So I got my last question for you. This is kind of the closing one. For young pitchers watching this, what's your biggest piece of advice for them?
My biggest piece of advice for pitchers that are watching this is I would say again, the best piece I would say how you do one thing is how you do everything, right? It falls back into the routines and the structure and the willingness to prepare. But also doing your homework, doing your research, self-education, like learning how to develop that education, but also being very selective on who you want to work with. I think that's very important for athletes to understand, who do they want to work with? How do they want to separate themselves? So doing your homework, doing your education and, being a student of the game is going to be very important. And then, like I said, for the thousandth time, and this is having structure, having routines, mentally thinking as a journey. If you're a kid out there that just feels like you're behind the eight ball and, you feel like velocity is going to be your ticket to the door, I would challenge you to rethink that and not worry so much about that. Because at the end of the day, if you gain, can you sustain?
Hmm.
Because even if you do want to develop that velocity, even if you gain, the question, can you sustain? So again, that's the journey mindset, from a sustainability perspective. So again, that falls on your preparedness, that falls on who you're working with and who's your mentor in your corner that's guiding you, and and what's your structure and routine like in the in season and also the off season, and also having great communication, as an athlete with your coaches, and just being a student in the game, asking a lot of questions. I think, at least from my perspective, the athletes in here that take their in-season approach very seriously, whether the game gets canceled or they have an off day, they're the first ones in here. When they're more on that hybrid remote side, when they can't get in because they're in season, they're constantly asking questions. They're evaluating, they're scheduling call, like just all of that, man. Like those are the guys that I see that really take that step to the next level.
Totally. Well, Ryan, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule, like I said in the intro, to make this work. I'm really happy we got something to set up. Thank you guys for watching another episode of John, Your Day Sports Sump, where we flushed out all the nonsense. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss another episode. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram and join me next time on the John, Your Day Sports Sump. We'll be harvesting a stink pickle of questionable sports opinions. Until then, keep your game face on and stay regular. This is the John.
Cool. Thanks, John. Appreciate you, man.
Yeah, no problem.
Don't nobody go in the bathroom for about 35, 45 minutes.